Hello everybody, welcome. My name's David Stainer. I'm the Impact Framework Manager for the whole of the university. So, we're going to talk about pathways to impact today. How many of you here have an actual project in mind that you are soon going to be applying for funding for, and you will need to deal with this aspect of the application form? Cool. So as I say, yes, it's very informal. There are a lot of you here, but please do ask questions. I think there are people here who will have a sort of range of experience. I recognise a few of you, so please do, where I slip up, please do share the wealth of your experience. So for those that don't have a project in mind, are there any sort of other particular reasons, as to why you're here? Have you sort of come from a different jurisdiction and you're wondering what impact is, or are you sort of just very early on in your career? Anybody wants to sort of volunteer?
I've just submitted in September, so I was curious to see whether the things I put in, this training was after the fact for me, but I thought I'd come and see.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for being here. Anybody else? Sort of, yeah.
So I'm interested to know what other impacts there are other than supporting industry and publications. So these seem like the big things to me.
Yeah.
But I'm interested, there must be more.
Yes.
So how does that apply? How does it apply to engineering?
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. Yes, so this is run by the Public Policy at Southampton group, but it is completely broad. It's not specific to public policy. Public policy is actually the area of impact I probably know the least about. So, so any questions on that, I'm sure Urena will be more than happy to answer. But as far as what I'm going to cover in this session, so by the end of this, you will understand what impact is and what it isn't. You will have considered the potential impact of your research, those of you who have projects to think about. And you will have a plan of how to realise this potential impact. So there are a lot of you. That last bit will largely be a sort of going away and thinking exercise, but there will be some time at the end to sort of ask questions and do some brainstorming. But we will be basing this round what used to be the RC UK. Sorry, I haven't corrected that yet. Anyway, what used to be called RC UK, their pathways to impact requirements and indeed the impact summary that goes with it. So, as I say, this is going to be a very sort of interactive session. So, does anybody want to have a go at answering this question here? What is impact?
And society.
Great.
Economy.
Yes, those are the two big ones. Oh dear, my writing is society and economy. Okay, what's it underpinned by? What are we looking to have sort of under these benefits here? What's underpinning it? What are we all here to do at the university? Research, wonderful. Okay, and is this, sorry, my writing's terrible. Is this any old research? Andrew Wakefield's Lancet paper on the link between the MMR vaccine and autism. That's had a massive effect on society, but is it impact? Has anybody sort of been triggered by what I just said?
Positive impact.
Positive impact, right. So we're probably looking at a benefit.
And based on sound research.
Sound research, wonderful. So the word we tend to use is excellent. Well, in particular, that's the word that RC UK use because they're not going to fund any research that isn't putatively excellent. But yes, thank you. You took the bait. That's great. So benefits. So if our research uncovers a new oil well, and sort of as a result, then there's a whole new market for oil, and sort of the renewable energy sector is driven underground because it's so much cheaper to do it this way. That may not be a benefit. We do broaden this out a little bit to effect. Benefits are sort of very objective things, and the other word we use is change. So those are kind of the three things we're looking to sort of get out of the research, and they are being imposed on society and the economy. We will unpack this a little bit a bit later on. Confusingly, there are two definitions of impact. So there's one given by the research councils, not RC UK. So it's the demonstrable contribution that excellent research makes to society and the economy. And then there is a second definition which is used by Research England, or HEFGE as was, which is an effect on, change or benefit. So we've got those three words there too, and then they sort of unpack society and the economy a bit to include culture, public policy, services, health, the environment, or quality of life beyond academia. So I've just highlighted a few of the more important words there. So demonstrable contribution. So if something has had an impact but we can't prove it, how do we know that it's had an impact? Trees falling in the forest and things like that. Excellent research. So yeah, I've mentioned already in terms of RC UK, they only fund excellent research. And in fact, in terms of REF, by the way, if you don't know what REF is, I will tell you later. I have half a slide on it. It takes up about 95% of my time, and this is a wonderful break. In terms of REF, the impact that you can claim in REF must be underpinned by research which is at least internationally recognised. So in Research England, they've also unpacked this effect, change or benefits, as I mentioned before. And then one important bit is that it must be beyond academia. So all the sort of academic benefits that come out of research, which is the inherent benefit of research, that is left to other parts of the application form, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. There may be in future some sort of a harmonised definition, but for now we have these two, and I think it covers things pretty well. So, who are the beneficiaries or stakeholders? So we sort of touched on this in one of the definitions, but if maybe people just want to shout out a few ideas as to who outside academia benefits from research? Public. So, in the impact administration and public engagement sector, we don't like the word public. We prefer the word publics, which is a horrible word. But when we talk about engaging with the public, we want to know a bit more about who we are engaging with. And the words we use are community of interest and community of space. And I'll show a diagram in a little bit once we've sort of come up with a few more of these. But yeah, we really want to know about sort of the audience that we're engaging with and who's going to be interested in the research. But thank you for mentioning that one first. Anyone else?
Practitioners.
Practitioners, wonderful. And is this where might these practitioners sit? What sort of sectors?
Third sector organisations.
Lovely. Third sector. Health, yep, great. Healthcare. Sorry, my writing's terrible. Anything else? People are very hesitant to mention sort of the more commercial side of things and the industrial side of things. People don't want to sort of seem too mercenary when it comes to impact. But industry and commercialisation are also a big part of what impact is. Yes?
Sorry, can I ask a question? What's the difference between a practitioner and somebody who's based in industry?
So I suppose this is a practitioner, say an industrial practitioner is essentially somebody who is practicing something in a for-profit organisation.
Oh, so practitioners is not for profit, industry is for profit? These are sort of subheadings of practitioners. So, So I was thinking more of practitioners, but practitioners in industry, and actually third sector healthcare industry. There's another big one. Who has organised this session?
Education.
There's education, yep. And
Policymakers?
yes, policymakers. Policymakers. Right. Sorry, writing's terrible. Anything else? Okay. Well, I will put everyone out their misery and show this diagram here. So this is a diagram that is from the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement, who have a very unwieldy acronym, but and it's a very good organisation in terms of sort of the broader sense of impact, not even just public engagement. So I very much recommend you go and visit that website. So they've sort of split stakeholders of research up into these four broad categories here, and then place these individual stakeholders within that. So as I mentioned, we've got our communities of place, our communities of interest, so our general public up there, which is a term we never like to use. Civil society, so yes, third sector. Business down here, so industry practitioners, but also just businesses themselves in terms of the money that they're making. And then we get to more the public sector and policy over here. So yes, we mentioned education, the cultural side of things as well. So it's quite often quite tricky to evidence that kind of thing, but certainly sort of cultural change, cultural influence forms a big part of what research does. We've mentioned health and we've mentioned our policy, and then we've got the sort of more local side of things here. So it's a very useful diagram. You will be getting these slides afterwards, by the way, so before anybody asks that. So and I do tend to sort of talk around things. So those are broadly, not exhaustively, our beneficiaries outside of academia of our research. So how will the beneficiaries benefit? I suppose we could vaguely link that up with these, if you can even read that. Yeah, policymakers, education, industry, healthcare, third sector. Does anybody want to just sort of, explore what benefits or change or effect we might have on these individuals?
Health outcomes.
Great, yep. Oops. Health outcomes. Oh dear, it's this jacket. Sorry, yes. One for industry.
More profit.
Yep, great. Profit.
May I ask, I would love to put one for third sector. What is third sector?
Third sector charities, not-for-profits, social enterprises, I suppose. So.
Change in practice.
Yep. Change in practice. I suppose that could apply to the third sector. It could apply to healthcare through guidelines. It could apply to industry through just better ways of doing things. Education in terms of the curriculum, and indeed policymakers, possibly less sort of change in practice and more just change in the stuff that they're churning out, the stuff they debate on. Anybody else? Something from your own research that you might expect to apply to any of these?
Sort of capacity building type.
Great, yep. Would you say that applies to, you have a specific example or?
I suppose where some research can help link up partnerships and understand, sort of networks.
Yep.
And that kind of thing. So maybe more, not so much policy. Well, actually, I think it goes through to all those.
So it could apply to all of them. Great. Okay, so there's sort of some broad benefits here that can affect a majority, if not all of those. Again, so this is again a non-exhaustive list of potential impacts that might come out of research according to UKRI. We've covered health there, wealth creation, good. We've covered profit. Research capacity, knowledge, skills. So again, change in practice, good. We've covered that. Organisational culture and practices. So that would come under our practice category. Effectiveness and sustainability of organisations. So it's not always about making a profit for organisations, but it could be in terms of improving their sustainability, their environmental credentials, the way that they do things, their sort of corporate responsibility. Attracting R&D investment. Making a profit, but also just the very act of attracting investment into an organisation does count as impact. It is showing that things are sort of having an effect outside of academia. Social welfare, social cohesion, and/or national security. Okay, so that's quite a broad category there. Commercialization, exploitation, it's a horrible word, but when we talk about licensing and spin-outs of technology, that's the sort of, those sorts of enterprise activities that we're talking about there. Cultural enrichment, I've touched on that already, and quality of life. So quality of life it may be cultural, but it may also apply to healthcare, and that's sort of demonstrated by these various quality of life metrics that you can get. Environmental sustainability, protection, and impact. So again, touching on the sustainability thing there, but it needn't necessarily apply to organisations. It could be how are we making sure that our rivers don't burst their banks, or that indeed we have enough food in our hinterlands to feed the country. Evidence-based policy making, great. So that's what the public policy at Southampton people do. And then public engagement, certainly last but not least. Public engagement is a very broad term. I am going to touch on it a bit later, the difference between sort of public engagement and actually the impact that comes out of public engagement, because there's quite an important distinction there. So I will elaborate on that a little later on. Is there anything here that people think might have been missed? Any other ones that people think aren't in this non-exhaustive list? I personally can't think of any, but please, okay, if no one else can, that's great. So, but please do shout out if you think of one throughout this presentation. So, why are we embedding impact into our research? Why are we doing this? What's the point?
Why do research if you're not seeking to?
Great, yes. It's what we it's what we do research for. To make a difference. Oops. Okay, to make a difference, it's why everybody is doing this. Anything else? Why else?
Cynically, but in reality, to make sure money is well spent.
Great, yep, so provide accountability. And we do that through what channels? Anybody aware? How do we make sure that the money is well spent in research?
You have to compete for it.
Yep. So we've got our grants. Anything else? I mentioned it earlier. Essentially, what I do for most of my time. Ref. Yep. Again, if you don't know what ref is, I'll explain a bit later, but you don't need to worry about it too much. Yep, so essentially we have to generate impact nowadays. It's part of the landscape. Providing accountability and inherent, the inherent sort of nature of what we do. Anything else? Let me see if... Right, so, enables research to make a difference. It demonstrates that research is important and worth using and investing in. So, really, we're asking the public for their money. They want to see some sort of outcome. It can inform research and improve its quality. So certainly in terms of engaging policymakers, engaging the public, engaging industry, a lot of the time we need to engage with these people, and in turn we will be having an effect on them. We will be having a benefit from the beginning of sort of practice-led research, and that's what makes research useful, when we actually know what problems we have, what questions to ask, and what solutions we need to come up with. Benefits your personal reputation and career progression, believe it or not. So all the promotion around the good stuff that's coming out of your research, we do like to shout about this. And indeed, REF, which I'll come on to a bit later, does have a very sort of promotional public element to it as well. And just us as a university, we want people to know that we're here for the good of society. It's required in funding applications, we have to, and indeed it creates a favourable reputation and financial return in REF. Good. So, essentially what we're going to do is cover what will be included in the impact summary of your average RC UK application. So there are two questions that are asked in this particular section of the application form. They are, who might benefit from your research, and how might they benefit from your research? So, using the diagrams that I put up earlier as a prompt, do sort of brainstorm on this. For each project, maybe come up with 3 of your top beneficiaries and how they might benefit. But if you have more time, please do go mad and list as many beneficiaries as possible. More than 3, I think you'll be pretty lucky. And then a bonus question here, which isn't covered in the impact summary, but is sort of increasingly an important part of impact. How are we going to evaluate the benefits of our research? And just think about how you might sort of capture the benefits and how you might show that this impact is actually being had. I've included a quotation there from Mark Reed of Fast Track Impact. He is based up in Newcastle and he has sort of established himself as Professor Impact. But anyway, so ask yourself, visualize yourself at the end of your project having achieved an impact that everyone is talking about. Where are you and what can you see? What has changed? What are people saying about how they have benefited? And I would recommend the Fast Track Impact website for a lot of great material on how best to package and generate impact. So, those of you who have projects, give a sort of 3-minute thesis to the rest of your table about what your project is about and sort of who you feel the main beneficiaries are. Everybody else on the table, obviously feel free to chip in with your own ideas regarding those beneficiaries and how they might benefit. So, please go ahead.
It's not a specific project. We just came up with the idea, but yeah, it was related to my field, which was, say you came up, for example, with some sort of device or change to practice which cut CO2 emissions from aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
We tried to work out who and how that would benefit. So we thought, it's the question really is how do you put down the whole world in terms of? It seems such a big.
It does, yeah.
I mean, how do you make it specific when you're talking? If you're talking about something like cutting CO2, so it cuts.
I think, yeah, generally referring to sort of global targets on CO2 reduction sort of does it, as long as, if there are sustainability goals that have been, decreed from various policymakers, Paris Agreement, all that stuff.
And the benefit of that is the public.
The benefit, so in this case you can say general public, we're not going to say it's, people interested in breathing or anything like that. It's, I will allow that one, and that is, but yeah, I mean, it's not just people, is it? It's the environment as well. Maybe there are sort of communities of space who are more affected by this sort of pollution in less developed countries, perhaps, that might be highlighted.
Yeah.
Potentially, if we are going to sort of try and squeeze out those sort of specific communities.
We thought governments would benefit in terms of hitting the targets that they've promised.
Yeah.
And aircraft manufacturers and airlines in terms of fuel costs will come. I mean, CO2 and fuel are closely linked, so if CO2 goes down, fuel costs go down.
Yeah. And their own sort of corporate responsibility as well. Yeah, I don't know if you've written that, I can't actually see this. So. Green credentials. Yeah. Indeed. So we've got the public, we've got airlines. Sorry, is there something else down there?
Public and businesses, really.
Businesses, yeah.
We had a question over that. I mean, if you improve climate change, do you bring well-being into that? There seems to be a lot of overlap between some of those boxes. You could argue that improving health and well-being is a knock-on effect of avoiding climate change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Should you bring that in?
Oh yeah, totally, yeah. And something as global as this. I mean, there's one on universal healthcare over there. Obviously, where there is universal healthcare publicly, then the healthier people are, the better. Private health, it's not so good for them because they can't, they won't have as many people to treat. But we ignore that. It's to do with it's more to do with the global good. But yeah, absolutely, And any sort of, I mean, there's so many statistics out there, regarding sort of how how much more polluted our air is, and all linked to greenhouse gases and so forth and stuff like that. I mean, certainly in a grant application, you wouldn't be expected to sort of dive too deep into sort of the massive wider implications with sort of all the evidence, because it's sort of generally known, but certainly sort of pinpointing the particular project, what change it is expected to have.
That leads on to our how do you measure it? I mean, we came up with quantitative sort of percent reduction in CO2, pounds of fuel spent.
Yeah.
But how do you do more qualitative? We put a question mark there. So say changing organisational practices. How how would you show your impact in that?
Yeah, well, quite. I suppose. We know that aircraft nowadays are.
So say you come up with something that meant they're going to operate their airplane slightly differently and it will save fuel.
Yeah, absolutely. Then the airlines, they will know how much fuel they're using. Airplanes are flying slower nowadays for that very reason. They may not be particularly willing to sort of give up their statistics. I've not asked them, but but I say there's definitely sort of measurements out there. And that's actually I'd say that's actually one of the more easy ones to measure in terms of you do have a quantity of fuel they're using every year. It's very much in the airlines' best interest to not spend too much on that. And so, the numbers are out there. But the wider sort of emissions, that is obviously a lot more difficult to quantify, and one wouldn't expect to sort of say, yes, this research will be, reducing the temperature of the world by this much, and things like that, or increasing.
Potential for this amount.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Having those headline figures and saying, this will be a contributor to that,
Right.
is fine. So yeah, thank you very much.
So this project looks at universal health coverage in Indonesia, especially for older people. It has to be submitted in 2 days, so hopefully identified all the beneficiaries.
Great.
Obviously it's the users. The whole idea of the project is to identify access barriers, and then in the long run, reduce them and make sure especially older people have access to healthcare. But it also has an effect on the general public, because we argue that actually older people are not on the agenda at all especially in Indonesia, but in general in low-middle income countries. So we argue there's a lot of ageism, and hopefully that will increase the awareness of it and might reduce it. There are other petitioners, like obviously policymakers. The Ministry of Health is interested in that, because they are rolled out a nationwide insurance scheme, but older people are not involved in the scheme. So the question is why? And then, but also petitioners like the World Health Organization, who in general looks into how can we measure the process towards universal health coverage.
Great. So you're submitting in 3 days. So is it that people in Indonesia don't have insurance at the moment, or is it that they are paying far too much for it and they will be saving money?
So it's less than 50% of older people are actually insured under a universal health insurance scheme.
Okay.
So there are two things. It's like, why are those people not insured? And then the second thing is the people who are having access to healthcare, who are insured, how are they actually benefiting? Do they have access to quality care? Do they suffer from ageism? Do healthcare professionals, are they prepared to deal with the multimorbidity of older people and so on?
Great. Okay. And are there healthcare companies who might actually disbenefit from this, or healthcare companies who might change their practices as a result?
Maybe the National Health Insurance Scheme won't be too happy if we tell them you're not performing well enough.
Okay. All right. But there's not so much of a sort of private healthcare culture in Indonesia as there is sort of here or in the States. Okay. All right. Great.
When the batteries in an electric vehicle come to the end of their useful life, they can still be used in a stationary application to extend the lifetime and avoid the manufacture of new batteries, which seems like a great idea, but second life batteries are also less efficient. So when they're used, they might not be so good, you have to replace them more often. And what I'd like to do is evaluate the environmental and financial impacts of new versus second life batteries. So I thought businesses might benefit from that, having a better idea of, better information for decisions on designing and installing such solar battery systems. Policymakers for regulating or designing incentives for this type of thing, and research, whether in universities or private companies, working out what specific areas within solar cells and batteries need to be focused on specifically, because some aspects might be worse environmentally than others, or more costly as well.
Great. So I do envisage there being a sort of service to, bring in these batteries and give them a give them a second life, somewhere where people can sort of
Yeah.
deposit their old batteries?
There are a few companies already looking into that kind of business model, but it's not very widespread yet.
Okay, and would you be engaging with those companies in particular, sort of with this sort of research? And
Well, it's just a PhD.
nothing's just a PhD. PhDs have as much applicability as as any research. But I say, find out what's out there, who's going to be interested in this stuff, and get them involved would be my personal advice. But that's really interesting. Any sort of comments, advice, further sort of impacts you wouldn't think of on reusing batteries? I mean, might the companies that manufacture batteries, they might not be quite so pleased about this?
Well, it depends if it actually turns out maybe it's better for the environment or for their bottom line if they do just keep manufacturing them rather than have us constantly reuse the second life ones.
Right,
Maybe
okay.
we just need to work on recycling electric vehicle batteries. I don't know yet.
I was just going to add the kind of environmental benefits of, not having to dispose of so many old batteries, which must have a horrific kind of impact. So if you can get more life out of old EV batteries, then it's going to be good for the environment and for various goals and targets and things like that.
There's a benefit to recycling lithium ion because lithium reserves are short or they are finite. So there's an argument against that as well, actually. Depending on lithium ion use, how the trends go, you might need to be recycling.
Indeed. So anyway,
Instead of reusing them.
Yeah.
Right.
I just had a question just about a comment that you made. You pointed out that obviously with good impacts, there could also be potentially not so good impacts, especially with something that's kind of like technically like a disruptive technology that comes through and basically changes everybody's bottom line. Is that something, and there's potential of course that something could come in and for the first 5 years actually a net, if you were to evaluate it, or net might cause in terms of this framework, particularly if it had a particularly harmful economic impact, could be actually net not so good, actually worse.
Yeah.
So, but do you ever articulate those on a form? You always just say, oh, it's going to be perfect, it's going to be all these good things, and then all the other things that might not be so good for a load of other stakeholders, we just don't talk about those.
Yeah. Well, I would say talk about them if you think you have a solution. If you sort of anticipate, if you anticipate who might have a problem with this. If it's commercial organisations, you anticipate who might have a problem with this. Say, well, actually, we think the promotion around this will mean that that they can't be outspoken, in their sort of. In their annoyance that their battery sales are down because we're going to make such a big splash about this that actually the people are going to see the bigger picture, and their corporate responsibility credentials will determine will make sure that they get on board with this. So I mean,
Maybe battery manufacturers need to expand into repurposing.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So even sort of getting one on board and saying, right, we're doing this, and there's nothing you can do about it. But if you want to part in this and want to show that you're actually leading the way in your social responsibility, and you're going to come up with sort of a reuse scheme, then that might be best in your favour. So, but yeah, in the impact summary, when you're saying sort of how great your benefits are going to be, you would not include it in there. In the pathways to impact that we'll come on to in a bit, any challenges that you can think of that might sort of hinder your progress, whether they be political or commercial or whatever, if you have a solution to them, or at least think about a solution to them, try and identify and think about a solution. If you have something that's sort of credible that you can that you anticipate the panels that are going to be assessing this stuff, if you can sort of anticipate them envisaging these challenges, then try and address those within your pathways to impact. But yeah, I'm just being difficult at the front here.
It's taxpayers' money.
It is?
UKRI is taxpayers' money, it's not companies' money.
I know, but I suppose what I'm saying is that let's say you do something that's really good for the environment, but it actually temporarily harms the economy. So let's say there's something that the UK produces a lot of, but it's actually not very good for the environment. You put something out there that then, disrupts that, and then actually we don't make this thing anymore. I'm thinking, for example, let's say somebody came up with a brand new jet engine, something to power planes.
Yeah.
Suddenly Rolls-Royce goes out of business. That's temporarily bad economically for the UK. UK,
Yeah.
but from a global environmentally perspective, it's quite good. So how do you because it feels like we're just talking about the gains, but we're not at any point talking about. And it's like, okay, that's what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, sort of, within
And
your
both affect taxpayers, the environment and whether there are jobs for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And for every benefit there might be a disbenefit. But certainly, unless you have a solution. I mean, that's a big example you've given there. But yeah, unless you sort of have a solution for mitigating things, I think it's unlikely sort of. I don't know if anyone else wants to chip in here, but I think it's unlikely that would sort of be held. Something quite that big would be held against somebody when they are sort of developing something quite so novel. I don't know if anybody else has a view.
Can't Rolls-Royce manufacture your invention for you?
Well, no, I know what it just feels like whenever you do something and it comes through and it changes things, there are some things that are going to potentially be good for, take the classic, there's something that's good for the environment that's bad potentially temporarily for companies that have infrastructure invested in certain things. I use Rolls-Royce because I know that it's UK based, but it's just that they're both things that taxpayers want. And I suppose this is a political question, isn't it? It's like, what do we want? It's sort of various theories.
That's where you need to involve public policy.
But it just feels like in a lot of cases there will be, even within this structure, there will potentially be winners and losers.
Yeah.
And do we have to articulate that we've actually assessed the losers as well and said overall there's a net gain?
Not to that level. I think if there are any, I don't know if anybody disagrees, but I would say not to that level. Think about the benefits. Benefits are a relatively subjective thing, but certainly, don't go to any great depth into what the problems might be. As I say, unless it is sort of a surmountable hurdle that is sort of going to be obvious and might come up. What particular optic things are we?
Well, the idea is that in developing countries, the wastewater system is not as in the developed countries, so they mix all together. So that when they process all these wastewater, it's a very complicated process, and that leads into health problems.
Okay.
So the way that they can measure, for instance, the oxygen depletion in the water tanks, which sometimes are square kilometers wide, it's by a very expensive chemical sensor. So we are trying to solve this by an optical fiber, which is very cheap. We can monitor it. So that has, for the company that actually processes this wastewater, has less process to return the water again into the pipeline.
Okay.
And then for the water that is now discharged, people in some countries, they drink from those effluents, which also have health issue problems, or they use this water for crops as well. So that also we have that problem.
Interesting, yeah.
So the way we can measure the impact would be how many cycles the company does to this water in order to make it to the standard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other option would be to monitor the health counts of, for instance, E. coli in the nearest hospitals.
Yeah.
Because the problem is when the crops cannot be sold to the big markets because they make the test and don't pass, they sell it to the local markets and they don't do any inspection.
Right, yeah.
So the people from the region get sick and they go to the hospital and then you can measure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the project.
Fantastic, yeah. So there is quite a sort of defined, measurable sort of health impact there in terms of people going to hospital with certain, diseases that are directly arise from this, and the associated cost benefits of that, on the, at the local country level. Is it a particular country or is it?
Well, basically it's Latin America.
Okay.
Countries.
All right. Great. Okay. Yep. So we've got that. It sounds very, again, mercenary to talk about sort of cost savings when it really, it's sort of the health of people. But whenever you do think sort of health benefit, do you think sort of right, what are the savings going to be a little higher up potentially? But then you've also got your immediate beneficiaries in the companies that actually treat the water. So they're going to have cost savings. Hopefully they would pass those cost savings on to the government who's employing them potentially. But there's potential benefits in both those in both those places. And then the overall health stuff as well. So that's great. Anything else that who want to add to that? I think it's really interesting and multifaceted.
Just kind of fitting with a number of these examples and the way we were talking towards the end. In terms of evaluating benefits, if you start this project in a way, the way we started talking was clearly about the company, the innovation going into the company, and you can sort of see how you set up a project in that way. But then when you start talking about the hospitals in the region, it seems that's kind of more lateral sort of partnership, and you might not be planning to work with them.
Absolutely.
And I think there are a number of cases here when we talk about the qualitative things, there are a number of partners who it's their business to be monitoring, I don't know, something to do with cyclists or something. Maybe it's an action group or something. Perhaps they've actually got access to kind of information that then feeds into that information you need. So I think we're starting to get into that conversation that it changes what it is you're measuring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or you're drawing on someone else's expertise.
So when you're thinking about your pathways to impact, i.e. who you're going to engage with in terms of your stakeholders, it may not just be the people actually using the stuff, it may be the people benefiting from it. So yeah, as you say, the healthcare profession, they're not going to be using this actively, but it is going to benefit them, and sort of finding out actually what sort of information they would have on this and how you're evaluating it.
Because actually one of the discussions we have with the other partner when we are discussing this one is because he wants to focus this one into the environment point of view, because also these big ponds emit a lot of methane, and he was trying to go to climate change.
Right, yeah.
But it's more difficult to measure how we can impact on the amount of methane we are.
It's worth putting in though, yeah. Embellish it. I say, the more multifaceted your impact, so long as it's sort of valid and it is directly directly coming out of it. Don't try to cram every single impact you possibly can into your applications. A classic is when people sort of put a token sentence about public engagement within their pathways. I'm moving on to pathways to impact in a bit, but you sort of ask, well, why are you engaging the public? I don't know, because we have a department that does it for us, and I think it's good. It's sort of right who you're aiming towards, and what you're actually going to do. In this case, clearly, the public are a massive stakeholder, and you have enough to be getting on with, without sort of taking this on a roadshow or something like that, which possibly has the potential to sort of dilute this stuff. So yeah, that's really thanks for that. That's really interesting.
So this is about internal migration, low-skilled migration from poorer parts of India to sort of the booming cities of the south and the west. Surprise, surprise, internal migrants face similar kinds of issues and rhetorics that international migrants face in Europe and America. So this project will look at a number of different things. We'll look at their working conditions and labor regimes and contracts and things like that. But it will also look at their living conditions, access to services, education, housing, health, etc. And thirdly, we'll look at how the local community, the local residents view these migrants. So there's very little research on internal migrants in India, particularly qualitative research. And so we've identified a number of sort of potential beneficiaries of this research. One is local policymakers, urban planners, planning services and things like that. But also in terms of managing these transient migrant population and the services sort of that they can access, as well as national policymakers who are planning flows of migration from poorer parts of India to the booming parts of India. So there's policymakers, there's the NGOs who might support migrant communities, either through integration or helping them access services and things like that. They would benefit from our research, particularly about the experiences of accessing this kind of research. And thirdly, there is this general public in terms of improving social cohesion and acceptance of these poor, low-skilled migrants. They face similar kinds of rhetorics within India as international migrants face in, say, Europe or America. So those are the three main beneficiaries. And really how they would benefit is having better quality evidence-based research to base their local level policies, local level services, and also a kind of general image issue as well.
So yeah, thanks. And so this is something that I assume is sort of widely covered in the press and so forth. And I mean, is there sort of, you know, local press vilification that goes on?
It's
not
actually
quite that?
not covered in the press at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a very different situation.
Right, okay.
You know, it's from what we have about migration here.
Yeah.
It's not even recognized. They're not recognized as migrants in some ways. You know, they're recognized as migrants by local communities who see them as threats to culture, or you know, coming and taking jobs and things like that.
Yeah.
But there's very little in sort of the policy domain or the media domain. So it is to sort of raise the issue that this is actually, you know, a social process that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I only ask because obviously it's a huge country and it's a huge problem. And you know, if it's not being covered in the press, maybe it needs to be covered more in the press, and sort of that kind of analysis you can do on sort of how things are covered, what the reactions are, and so forth, is a kind of indicator that, you know, the issue is being raised.
Right. So it would be like an impact.
Well, yeah, that would be very sort of the reciprocal effect of what you're doing. But then, of course, on the ground level, engaging with those policymakers, getting those policymakers to, you know, to actually take action, even in sort of having that debate and influence in that debate. You know, it's difficult to get policymakers to say, you know, this research made us change something that we do, but clearly if it's informing the debate and some policy has come out of that, then that's, you know, that's pretty solid demonstration of
But when
things
you
happening.
say evaluate the benefits, the policy may take 5 years to come out.
Yeah.
And you're not around for those 5 years.
Quite, yeah. So, well, when you say not around, you mean just
I mean,
as in you've gone on to...
I mean, you're not in the field, and
Yeah.
you're not engaging with the policymakers
Yeah.
for those 5 years. You might be able to see it from a distance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I say this is again, if you don't know what REP is, I apologise. I have half a slide on it later. But yeah, certainly with REP, this is in terms of, you know, evaluating the impact of particular projects. This is a massive problem. Certainly, and I have to say, you know, certainly in sort of third world, you know, developing countries, where actually sort of getting this information and sort of engaging with policymakers can be tricky. So yeah, it's very much a sort of a developing practice, sort of being able to evaluate this stuff. But yeah, sort of whatever evidence, you know, you can find from sort of certain policymakers doing things about this, even if it's not directly from them. If it's about sort of improvements in social housing, you know, that you know about, then that's the kind of indicator you could be looking for. I'm not an expert on this, but yeah, just off my own sort of top of the head, you know, if you're thinking of kind of indicators, then that might be included. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will move on to the rest of the slides. It is just sort of death by PowerPoint for the rest of the things, so I do apologise for that. But I hope you all found that useful in sort of thinking about the impact of your research, how you might measure it. We're going to come on to now who you might engage with. But before we do that, I've put up this diagram here, which is exactly the same as one of your previous slides with all the blocks. And I lifted that from, again, what used to be RC UK, and their Pathways to Impact diagram here. So they call it a Pathways to Impact diagram, but actually it is just the impacts. So they had this diagram. They call it economic and societal impacts. I'm just going to make the point that, confusingly, they have another definition of impact, which is academic impacts. So when we talk about research impact nowadays, generally we mean economic and societal impacts. But RC UK also talk about academic impacts, which is not what is covered in the Pathways to Impact statement or the impact summary, yet they called it impact anyway, which is very annoying. If it was down to me, I'd call it academic benefits because it belongs in the academic beneficiaries section of the RC UK application form. But you may hear impact in terms of journal impact. That's something that's very widely used. So how much a particular journal is cited by other articles. That is not a very good indicator of the quality of an individual article, by the way. And assessing things like that has been banned in REF. Again, if you don't know what ref is, I'll come on to it later. I really ought to do that at the beginning, shouldn't I? Just say this is ref and that's that. Anyway, and then, so yeah, in high impact papers, generally when people talk about high impact papers, they do mean sort of the citation impact, the academic impact. But other than that, when we talk about impact, generally we mean this economic and societal impact. So I'm just making that point. So yeah, that stuff belongs in the academic beneficiaries section, and this stuff belongs in your impact summary and pathways to impact section of the RCUK form. I've sort of munged together a couple of papers here into this impact journey, and you will get these slides electronically, and you can go and look at those yourself should you be interested. But yeah, I'm just this is just to illustrate sort of the very high-level process in trying to achieve impact from one's research. So inputs. The problem is that the water in a particular country through drains or. Yeah, through drains, yeah. So the water in particular through drains, it's not clean. People are becoming very unhealthy. The treatment process is inefficient. We're identifying all these problems. So we have, or would you say the research is actually finding out about those problems, or the research is sort of solving those problems through? Yeah, okay. So our inputs are those problems that you know are happening even before you've started your research. You've done your sort of your background research into actually what the problems are and sort of the scope to which your research could actually solve these problems. These are your inputs, and you're thinking, okay, that's not a good thing. So you undertake your research into how to resolve a particular issue that's creating these problems. And you produce your results. So you have found a more efficient way to treat the water. And then, so that's your research. And then everything from this side is starting to get into the impact realm. So these are the activities that you plan on undertaking to get the results of your research into the hands of people that will use it effectively. So your water treatment companies, your policymakers. If the policymakers aren't keen for whatever reason, if they feel it's sort of high cost, sort of actually saying to them, the more money you spend on treatment, actually the less you'll spend on healthcare and so forth. Making those arguments, even if they're still not convinced, maybe you can sort of plan to do some communications, some lobbying around getting this into policy through that way. So you're thinking, who is going to be interested in this research? Who can do something with it? You've got to think about those main people that you're engaging with, and then that's about as much as you can do, really. From here on, it's really up to the people that you've engaged with, and you may not be hands off, but certainly you can only do so much in terms of the activities. So, and you know what activities you can do. You know who you can go and engage with. If you've engaged with them already, all the better. The more specific you can be about who you're going to target, the better. Fantastic. And then those people, they do something with the findings. So the policymakers debate about it. Maybe a ruling comes out and maybe it gets enshrined into law. The treatment providers, they may trial it. They may come up with a new solution. They may it will work for them in terms of sort of making things more efficient. And indeed, sort of the press, if they find out that there is a solution to this problem, they're going to get their hands on that story and make sure it gets disseminated. And so that's how our impact stakeholders use this stuff. And then here is the stuff that we're interested in terms of monitoring what that change is over here. And it's when these benefits become demonstrable that we can say that we have made an impact. So, in terms of what you're looking for in your sections of the pathways to impact, sections of the RCUK applications, Research Council applications, sorry, old habits. So here is the bit that you need to cover in your impact summary. And then here is the bit that you need to cover in your pathways to impact statement. So this is as much as you can do. However, you do sort of begin to describe actually what you envisage these people could actually do with your research, and indeed touch upon the benefits that it's going to have on society and or the economy. Here's another way of looking at it. It's a bit more simplistic from David Gauntlett. Yeah, so here's your great research. Here's the interesting stuff you do with the results of your research to try and get it into the hands of people. And then here's your impact. So this is your deliberate step, and then this is the if you're lucky step. Another way of looking at that there. Why is pathways to impact important in terms of research councils? So depending on the research council, then pathways to impact is becoming a more integrated part of the way that they assess applications. I think sort of generally they grade it excellent, satisfactory or unsatisfactory. I don't know if there are some research councils that go a bit more granular than that, but generally those are the categories that they'll use to grade the pathways to impact. And they will no longer allow a grant to start until the pathways to impact is satisfactory. So it used to be, I think, that that top bullet point didn't really exist, and it was just sort of, all right, so long as pathways to impact is in there, that's fine. Now it's becoming a bit more of a part of the package of the grant application. So as I say, a good pathways to impact transforms the proposal into a coherent, accomplished package. Also, as I mentioned before, if you're engaging with people, if you're already attempting to make an impact early on in your research, then that actually informs your research. And the more you can prove that you've engaged with potential users at the outset and that you know what the specific problems are, the better. The more convincing a case it is for your funding. And then, very important, you can actually request more money to do the impact activities that you plan to do. And I will come on to that a bit later as well. I don't know have I missed anything out here? Is there anything else? No? Okay. I asked everybody that just in case. So here are some examples. It's non-exhaustive of what you can do, and I do touch on some of the departments actually within the universities here, within this university. So you can travel to potential beneficiaries of your research, whether that's an event that's already happening or whether it's just a small meeting to discuss the potential impact, and generally just sort of drum up interest. Something that requires money, put that in your application form. Specific training for anybody working on the project, so commercial practices, knowledge transfer, and so forth. Again, that costs money. Put it in your pathways to impact application, impact statement. Employment of specialist staff for knowledge transfer specialists or business engagement staff to organise specific events. We do actually have these in our research and innovation services section, but if there are any sort of particular real specialist stuff in terms of in terms of knowledge transfer individuals that do need to be brought in, again, they cost money. Put them in the pathways to impact statement. Secondments/placements to accompany academic institution. Now we're kind of getting into knowledge transfer partnership territory here. I'm kind of umming and ahhing as to whether I should keep this in. Do you think things like secondments and stuff would? Sorry, this is Cecilia, by the way, who is here to essentially decide how good I am. Do you think that's something that would even come into a pathways to impact? It could. But not on such a massive scale as, say, a KTP.
Not really.
Okay, all right. But I guess sort of exploring the possibility and saying that we've engaged with these people and they would be happy for for our PhD students or somebody to work with them.
Yeah.
So it's not.
There's no money in expectation that if you have a project partner, that would be part of their offering, so rather than asking for money from the council.
Yeah.
That should be really as part of the partner contribution to the project.
Yeah. Okay. So probably not something you'd ask for more money for. Okay, great. Thank you. I will note that. Workshops, seminars, other networking events, whether they're hosted here or elsewhere, fancy building. Again, it costs money. Put that in your costings. Dissemination. So Dissemination, of course, there is sort of just business as usual dissemination, publishing in journal articles. We're not interested in that in terms of the pathways to impact, but when we're translating those into a more digestible format, such as policy briefs, which the Public Policy at Southampton team do, which I've noted there, then yeah, that's the kind of thing. Again, design costs. Costs of public policy at Southampton. I believe Public Policy at Southampton do actually have a sort of menu of costed activities. Anything to do with sort of getting things into a digestible format for policymakers, and indeed holding workshops, seminars, networking events, travelling to various things, all the rest of it. Talk to the Public Policy at Southampton team. Unless, of course, it's nothing to do with policy, in which case talk to the public engagement with research units, who also have a set of costings of sort of standard things that they can offer. And then business development, yep, so we have research and innovation services, which is where I'm based. I sort of could be based anywhere really, but there you go. I'm based in Riz, and it's a pleasure. Anything to do with commercialisation, industry collaboration, and so forth. Anything essentially to do with making money out of research. Research and innovation services is the place. We also have Future Worlds, which is essentially, I suppose, an on-campus incubator, but also a sort of network of investors and so forth who would be interested in investing in sort of technology that has commercial potential. But generally, I would suggest engaging with research and innovation services first, and they can triage as appropriate.
They also have a costing model.
They also have a costing, yeah, and they even have a standard wording,
Yes.
which I'm not so keen on. I don't like standard wordings. I will have some examples, but yeah, I think standard wordings are just a bit of a no-no. I will come on to that a bit later. Maybe cut that bit out of the video. Thanks. Right. So the pathways to impact statement itself. It's not an exact science. This is merely a suggestion, but it seems to work. So when you're looking at your pathways to impact statements, you are saying who you're going to be engaging with in your research. It is a separate 2-page document. It's not in the actual JES form itself, so just be mindful that it is a separate thing. So it should be relatively self-contained. So do summarise the objectives of your research and the expected outcomes, and indeed the potential impact, even though you've sort of outlined that in your impact summary section. Just sort of outlining it here could help. And then a section for either each stakeholder, so I'm going to engage with policymakers or people in this industry, or or the press, because I think this has public interest, and so forth. So putting these various stakeholders under headings, or indeed if it's just sort of general activities rather than people you're engaging with. So yeah, I will be commercialising this through our technology transfer office, and we expect that it will it will attract lots of funding. So again, it's not an exact science, but generally sort of outlining these things under headings is a good thing to do. And then at the end, very important, timescales, where you know them. So if you don't know over what timescale, say, take policy for example. Policy can take any amount of time, and political climates affect it and so forth. But yeah, where you have a reasonable timescale, do include those. And indeed the resources. So as I mentioned before, cost anything that's going to price up anything that's going to actually cost money. And then your evaluation as well. So if you do sort of know exactly how you're going to be monitoring whether anything's had an impact, then include that in the last section there. All right, so I do actually elaborate on these next slides. So again, so looking at just the introduction, assume it will be read separately to the grant, and include the title, the funding scheme information, applicant names where appropriate, and obviously, if it's going to take you over the 2 pages, then slim it down. But just to sort of set the scene, don't go, saying, "Oh, don't you know who I am?" Don't describe your sort of extensive track record in impact, unless actually you've done stuff that is actually going to be useful for this project. an example, I used to work at Queen Mary. An example is there was a campaign called Action on Salt by a man called Graham McGregor. You've probably read about it in terms of sort of reducing the salt in our ready meals and stuff. And it was very, very successful. And then they thought, well, let's do the same with sugar. So they went for Action on Sugar. So when they're sort of looking at the research into the amount of sugar in, say, soft drinks and so forth, they can cite their previous campaign and say, well, this is a resounding success. There's absolutely no reason why this one should be just as successful. That is an example of when you can talk about your track record. If you're just going to say that you're engaging and you're brilliant and so forth, that's not going to win you any favours. So, so keep the introduction relevant. The message there. Section for each stakeholder and activity. So yeah, where you've already engaged with them, do put that in. If you haven't engaged with anybody, try and engage with people. Again, if it's in 3 days' time, then obviously you don't have time to do that. But just thinking about these, right from the outset, as far in advance as you possibly can, and who you could talk to, that can only benefit your application. Think about how your stakeholders will benefit. So in terms of your potential reoffenders, there will be a direct beneficiary there. But then also think about the way that the people you're engaging with are going to contribute to the benefits. So your policymakers, they will potentially change policy, which will have a wonderful knock-on effect on the people it concerns. And then describe specific activities to encourage the take-up of outputs by stakeholders. So your press engagements, your lobbying, that kind of stuff. I've just repeated what sorry, it's this bit that we should be focusing on down here. So yeah, do define stakeholders in as much detail. Give the names, brief description of who they are. If you have any contacts there, say that you're in contact with a particular person. Think about your benefits, initials and indirect stakeholders, as I said there. Where this particular engagement is going to have a direct benefit, then state how you are going to evaluate that. So again, you're engaging directly with your offenders. How is this going to benefit them directly, and how is that going to be evaluated? As we say, we have our time period over which they are going to rehabilitate. Don't include generic token statements. So as I say, the public engagement example is a classic one. If you don't know what you're going to do, if you don't know why you're doing it, then there's not really much point putting it in. If you think it does have public interest, please do go and engage with the Public Engagement Research Unit, but don't sort of, as a default, try and sort of eke out a bit of public engagement when there's little point. Don't describe engagement with academic audiences. We're talking about your audiences, outside academia, unless it forms part of the critical pathway towards economic and societal impact. So I suppose if there was a particular research group that does have a good track record, that does have good connections with policy, and that you intend on sort of engaging with that particular research group, with your own research that has a different angle, then that could be, and if you're already engaging with them, even better, that could be a reason as to why you put your academic stakeholders within Pathways to Impact. And then the last bit, timescales, resources, evaluation. So if appropriate, use tables and Gantt charts, make it as clear as possible. If it makes a nice picture that really sort of shows that you're engaging all the way along your research process, then visualizing that can really help. Be realistic. Sorry, yes?
Just with tables and Gantt charts, etc., I hear that you can include those as attachments and sort of cheat the space limit. Is that right?
So I think now all the research councils have a diagrammatic work plan that you can attach as part of the proposal. So certainly, if there is such a document that you can attach, you can include part of the various work packages and an additional one during public activity. So yes, because also for the part that you only have 2 pages, so it might not be enough space. So.
Absolutely, yeah. But also bearing in mind this is a separate document, so it may come in useful. But yeah, so don't be, as I say, if it actually takes up less space than writing it all out, then put it in. And I say, yeah, tables for resources as well. So itemising your costs, rounding those up at the end. But of course, those costs do have to be consistent with the justification of resources. The other section, which is another section of your application. And indeed, as I mentioned before, consult the relevant departments, Peru, Public Policy, Future Worlds, RIS, whoever, for advice and costing. But then of course, ultimately the costing for the whole project goes to what used to go to faculty finance, and now there'll be a central finance hub at some point. Good, yep, it's in the workings. I've had some do's and don'ts already. These are kind of overview of do's and don'ts. So don't be vague. Be very specific and clear. Don't just put activities in for the sake of it. Make sure they're actually relevant and specific to the beneficiaries and the project. Focus on track record. So, let's say if you do have a track record and it's relevant, do briefly record that, but don't sort of don't go gushing too much. Consideration of broader beneficiaries. So again, thinking about you're handing your research to stakeholders. What are they going to do with it? Who is going to benefit? What's the bigger picture? Yes, so that's the lack of that's a slight double negative. Anyway, range of potential impacts, justified focus on specific areas and mechanisms. So to really think about it's all to do with relevance, really. Problematic pathway to impact. Activities narrowly and end of project focus. So do think about the life beyond your project and how you might engage. Of course, you can't actually cost things beyond the end of your project, which is very annoying. But do think about actually sort of the future and how you might continue to engage, especially if there's a sort of long sort of translational period. The best thing to do is as I mentioned, make sure it's sort of co-produced and the beneficiaries involved from the outset. Be active. Talk about what you're going to do. Don't sort of say this might happen. And then, focus on the use rather than the dissemination, which, of course, goes in a different section of the form. So here's some external links for you. Some internal links, actually. So we have our researcher portal maintained by RIS here. So essentially everything that RIS does is contained in there, and there's sort of various materials and a funding self-service section, which is very comprehensive and only recently developed, and it's very good. You've got your official UKRI guidance there, which I'm sure if you're applying already, then you'll already know about. Fast track impact, I mentioned that before, Professor Mark Reed at Newcastle University. So really, some really useful material in there. Okay, this is at Nottingham, but I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, but Nottingham have done a really good checklist, so do go there, just to make sure you've covered everything. Right, hooray, we're onto the slide that has ref on. So just FYI, part of what's driven the impact agenda so much is what you're expected to do at the end of your project once the impact has matured. So as you're probably aware, this dirty word research fish, which is a system that's, it still isn't the most user-friendly system, I gather, but it might be getting better. Anyway, this is a system in which anybody who's funded by research councils and various sort of Cancer Research UK, NIHR, British Heart Foundation, other sort of public and charitable research funding, a condition of the funding is that you have to report back on the outcomes and the impact of your project and put it into this system here for 2 years after the life of your project. There's a certain time period after your project has ended where you need to keep filling this in. And these all end up on, they're all publicly available, as is the impact summary, not the pathways to impact statement. So part of the reason for the impact summary is so that they can immediately say, look at this great research we're doing, look at what the benefits are going to be. These are all made public knowledge, except in sort of commercially and security sensitive cases, on the gateway to research, the link for which is there.
What is that information used for? Do they use it to assess future applications or anything like that, or is it just sort of sit there and get dusty?
I guess it. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's just it's just part of accountability, telling people how useful things are. I don't know if any.
Justify spending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To the
Sure.
public.
Yeah, absolutely. But they may sort of, any information is good information, really. So it's up to them how they use it. And then the REF, Research Excellence Framework, which I spend 95% of my time doing. So all departments, not all individuals, so don't panic, all departments must submit a certain number of 5-page impact case studies, which are assessed on the reach of impact. So that's sort of quantitative, how many people or locations or whatever are affected, or indeed diversity of beneficiaries as well. It's not just geographical or numerical. And significance, so how much are these individuals or companies or economy or whatever countries actually affected by this research. We'll have about 105 of these to submit come the end of 2020. And this will be for REF 2021, confusingly, that's actually when these things are assessed. So we have a lot of these to put together. They require thorough evidencing. They're sort of a very kind of reductive format that sort of is, causes consternation among sort of people who write beautifully and sort of have to put these things into sort of various sections and so forth, and careful articulation. So that's why they need a full-time person, or 95% person, to be looking at these and sort of coordinating it. And we have our wonderful impact champions within each department, which I don't think I've put a link there actually. But anyway, all right. So so only around 1 impact case study per 10 independent researchers. Full-time equivalent is required every 7 years, i.e. whenever the REF happens. So it is by no means the case that everybody needs to do these. And then there's also a REF environment statement. So these are 5-page documents, and the most valuable ones, the best quality ones, the 4-star ones, it's on a 4-star system, over the period which they inform, our most valuable ones will be worth about £2.5 million. So that's sort of in our engineering disciplines. The ones, because the research doesn't cost as much to do, the ones on the sort of arts and humanities social side of things will be worth sort of almost £1 million over the life, the period that these are informed. So yeah, £2.5 million for 5 pages. It's almost £2,000 per word. So these are they're quite valuable, these things, to the university, and that's essentially what's kind of driving the impact agenda. But by no means does everybody need to produce one. Dissemination and public engagement are not in themselves impact. You need to demonstrate that you have been that you've identified your audiences. You need to demonstrate that these audiences have been reached and that you have sort of your quantitative measures. But additionally, you have to evidence the significance. You have to evidence some kind of reciprocity from the people that have been engaged with your research or that have seen the research, and that can be in the form of sort of evaluation data, reviews, press, and so forth. Sort of proving the reciprocity of of the engagement that you've been doing is absolutely key to sort of showing that your engagement has had impact. Internal resources here. So you've got your public policy, public engagement, future wells, just links there. You'll get these slides afterwards. External, did I already? Oh, okay. Anyway, there's a bit of repetition here. Those are some useful resources there, and that's the end. So we don't really have time for questions, but my email address is on there, so do let me know. Thank you.